Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Charleston Gaines, and welcome back to the Cope Life Podcast. I'm so grateful you're here. And today I'm so excited to have a conversation with a good friend of mine, a mental health professional, Yonsenia White, she's more than just a mental health professional. She's more than a therapist. What I love about her is that she's incorporated arts into her mental health practice. A lot of us have heard of art therapy before, but I'm excited to learn more about it and dive deep into what art therapy is, how it helps, as well as just more of who she is and her experiences as well, helping veterans and other people. So without further ado, I just want to say welcome, Jan. Thank you so much for being here.
No problem. Thank you, Charleston, for having me on your podcast. Really looking forward to being able to, touch base with you, chat with you, and also your listeners on your podcast this morning. So thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate being here.
Well, it's an honor for me because just a real quick note is that I met you because someone that I really care about, a great friend of mine, introduced me to you.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is more than you're just some random art therapist. You're someone that I know, high quality. I think you're amazing. I'm glad that we've known each other now for a few years.
Yeah.
And I'm always open to learning. And so I guess what I kind of want to know is right off the bat, what's good about art therapy and kind of even before that, kind of if you can kind of tell me how and why you got into that specific field.
Yeah. So again, as an art therapist, so you have expressive arts therapies or expressive therapies. That's basically the umbrella term for the expressive arts. So it's art therapy, music therapy, dance movement, psychodrama, bibliotherapy, and sand tray and play therapy. So it's these different types of therapeutic modalities. So it's, basically rooted in, at least in my opinion, traditional psychotherapy with the additional benefit of visual art making or dance movement or music or that kind of additional component to it. So with art therapy, you're getting the benefit of two therapies at one. So you have traditional psychotherapy as well as the expressive therapy form. And so as I think that all expressive therapies, I'm glad to see that they are out there. Again, I'm a little bit biased because I am an art therapist and I'm also an artist. so I know that's the version, that's the expressive therapies form that I've been trained in. And I think that, when you're making art, there's a lot of things that are going on in it. And I will kind of back up a little bit and talk about how I got here, because again, like I was mentioning to you before, I never planned to be an art professor. I never planned to be a therapist. All I just knew is in kindergarten, I knew I wanted to be an artist. And so my background I'll talk a little bit about that too. So I'm a military kid. My dad's a Vietnam Army vet. And so we didn't really go a lot of places. He went to the cool places. We stayed CONUS. We stayed stateside. And so I just remember being in kindergarten at Fort Bragg, and we had our, activity centers, and I just naturally fell in love with art. And so I somehow knew at age 5 that I wanted to be an artist, if that is a thing. And so just knew that I would just have to figure it out. That's one of my life mottos. You'll just have to figure it out. And so eventually went off to college, majored in fashion design, realized that wasn't going to work. So I just said, hey, I really love art. So I landed in art and figured out how do I make a living at it. So, years later, went off to art school, became an art professor. I taught studio art for about 15 years, state schools, community colleges, small liberal arts schools. So I'm an art, I taught art for about 15 years. I'm also been a professional artist for over 25 years. And I've now been an art therapist for about 12 years. So again, these careers just kind of showed up because, out of the necessity of I need to have a way of making a living, but I know that I always wanted to be an artist because I'm a creative. And with art therapy, when I was teaching art, I didn't realize until I became an art therapist that I was basically doing some therapeutic art making, because the assignments that I was giving to students, especially those who were taking my advanced level courses in installation art, performance art, found object sculpture, fiber arts, they were really making the artwork about the personal experience, because a student would come into class one day and we're like, all right, let's do a critique. What are some of your ideas for this project? Well, I want to do an art piece about drinking and driving, for example. I'm like, okay, that's too big. Why does this make sense to you? What has happened that's gotten your attention to this particular issue? And so by just working with students and helping them really explore themselves, their ideas, their personal experiences, that had them making artwork about themselves, or really something that they were trying to, I guess, make sense of. And so, and then that's when I realized the beauty of, wow, you can, because I'm a conceptual artist, I'm a mixed media conceptual artist. So I make art about the idea. So my artwork talks about the embodied experiences of being a, 6 foot tall, dreaded woman of color, whatnot, who's trying to maneuver throughout different spheres in the world. And so my artwork is about my personal experience. And so these students seem to naturally gravitate towards that. So I guess this is why I think art, whether it's therapeutic art making, just visual art making, or art therapy, it's an opportunity for you to explore what is going on with you. How do you become more in tune to the things that you think about?
Well, you just
I hope that
you just
wasn't.
no. I love it. I love it because you said so much, and I think just the little bit that you just said is more than most people ever thought about art therapy. And so when you're speaking, first thing I'm thinking is, so there was a point in the beginning somewhere where you're having students create art, and they're making it personal, like how you mentioned the drunk driving. And so I can imagine, like, everyone in our lives, the way we ruminate on things, we will look at past events and we will relive them, replay them in our head. Sometimes we replay them with a sense of guilt. Sometimes it's regret. Sometimes it's, what could I have done better? Or it's, this is what I will do next time. But either way, we fashion the art in a way that is almost therapeutic to us, but unintentionally. And so then what happens is that we are helped by our arts, but it's different when you're guided by an instructor or a professor. And so my question to you is, at what point did you realize that this was therapeutic to them? And then how did that make you feel about your worth as their teacher?
I mean, that's a really, really good question. So kind of matches what you said about the knowledge I just dropped on you with that first question.
Yeah.
I don't. It's interesting. So it could have been like I can't even, because again, it's been so long since I taught, since I first walked into teaching. It was really more, and again, it was. I don't know. There's some magic that happens. Magic isn't even really the right term, but when you have students who, again, because yourself better than other things to certain degrees. The knowledge you have about yourself is already there. Sometimes if you want to learn how to do X thing or understand X theory, you got to read about it, look into it. But you are the author of your own life and your own experiences. And even though we may not always understand or know why things happen to us, we are the source of the information. And so I think when you create an environment where people can learn about themselves and explore themselves without a right or wrong scenario. Now, granted, when you're teaching, it's just a graded scenario, but I found a way to kind of remove that threat, fear of grade. It was really more about, what do you think? What is going on with your idea? How do you formulate and research your idea? So my students were making sketches. They were researching their ideas because I needed them to know, where is this coming from? It's not like, oh, I want to do an art piece about X, I'm just going to make it and call it a day. You need to have a thorough understanding of what it is you're doing, the symbols that you're using. And so I talked to them about semiotics, about the sign, the signified, and the signifier. And so stuff that I learned from like a class I took when I was teaching, and it really helped me become a better teacher. And so I think when you allow students, and then as I learned later in my additional career clients, to give them permission to explore themselves. And I didn't really have to give them permission. It's really more like giving them a context and an opportunity to do that. I found that people naturally blossom. And so all I was doing was, and I would tell my students, and I even tell my clients, I'm just massaging the genius. So here's the design problem. Here's your, you can approach it in any kind of way. You approach it in the way that makes sense to you. And so then all I do is provide you with critique. Have you thought about this? Have you researched that? And then that discovery of that idea is really them discovering themselves. And they come up with these, honestly, really dope projects, and I didn't even imagine it. I just know, what are they going to do? I got to do this, as I'm playing around with the syllabus. And so when they would walk in with the piece, the original idea, going through a couple of critiques and the final object, I was blown away. And then I was teaching in a place where I didn't have access to a wood shop. I didn't have access to the things I really needed to have. But somehow, again, I have to figure it out. So I had to teach them how to figure it out, and they would figure it out on their own, and they would come up with some amazing art pieces. So then I'm thinking, okay, here's something that this student just created, or this client just created, that they didn't realize that they could do. So now I'm tapping into something more than just, here's an assignment, do it, figure it out, turn it in, give you a grade, and let's go on to the next one. There's a lot more happening in the creation of that art product when I was teaching, and there's a lot happening in that session when they're creating that artwork. And so, and that became a little addictive for me, because that's when I realized that I love helping people reach potential, specifically helping them do things they never thought they were going to do. Because the students that I was teaching, in the context of what we were doing, I don't think they knew that. But when it started to happen, they started, okay, they kept, they was, obviously finished out the semester. And I noticed that they would keep taking more classes with me, or they would do independent studies. So then I realized that I started to develop my teaching philosophy, or the way that I went about teaching people how to be conceptual artists. And I was realizing that we already know how to read a conceptual art piece. You don't need a degree in conceptual art to figure that out. It's you relying on the senses. When you see the color red, or this particular color, or this particular object, placed in this particular space, or what do you know about that object that then lends itself to that dialogue? So I'm hoping that answers your question, but it was really something about having people explore themselves and using their own life experience as the subject matter, and letting them know that there is no right or wrong way to do this. Let's just see what you come out with, and then let's tweak it as it comes out to make it a stronger product.
I love so much of what you said, and it's really so fascinating to me, because I hear what you're saying, and honestly, to me, it aligns with what I do as an emotional intelligence trainer. It really does, because what you're saying, what I hear is a couple different things. First of all, it's when we begin to create this art, it's an expression of me in my life. Mm-hmm. It's not multiple choice. It's not the options you give me. It's coming from me. And so I cannot properly do that without elevating my self-awareness. Mm-hmm. I have to know me better. So like in math class, you have to understand the math to get the questions right. But what you're talking about, I have to understand myself to get the art right. And what's beautiful about it is no one says if it's right or wrong except for me. And so then the student can look at the art and say, when I look at this, this is my own, this is my piece, this is representation of my experience. Is it right or wrong? And the answer to that is based on how vulnerable were they willing to get with themselves in creating it. There's a bit of pain that was endured in the process. There's a little bit of hurt, but the individual doesn't tap into that as they create that art piece. So when they see it, it looks incomplete. And so even there, regardless of the grade given by you, even by them looking at that and seeing that story is incomplete because it doesn't include my pain, that's their growth as well. It's not like math or science where you turn it in, you get a grade, we move on. Like you can't move on because it's still you. And so they can look at it. It's like, regardless of what anyone else thinks, this conversation is powerful to me because I just feel like it's so much validating of all of the research that we've done on emotional intelligence and emotion regulation. And when you talk about the freedom to explore, well, how do we have the freedom to explore our history? How do we have the freedom to explore our experiences? Well, you decide how much freedom you have based on you tackling your inner demons, your vulnerabilities. Like, you have permission to feel throughout the project, but are you going to do it or not?
And it all depends, because I think that, when I was teaching and not knowing, I didn't even know art therapy existed till like about 2010. But then by then I realized, oh, this has been around for over 100 years. So, and I'm like, okay, wow. And so when I was teaching, and let me kind of back up and give you a difference between art therapy, therapeutic art making, and just visual art. So when you're making art for visual art's sake, you're just making visual art. So you could be doing woodworking or drawing or printmaking. So it's just art for art's sake. Therapeutic art making is when, so art therapy is, it's art making. You're in an art situation where you're being guided by an art therapist to complete a directive that has something that's going to help you increase your insight awareness, develop coping skills, help you develop certain insights to understand the situation that you're dealing with. And so we call it art therapy because it's under the facilitation and guidance of an art therapist who is a licensed, trained mental health professional who knows the mental health theories and concepts behind what they're doing. So you can only call it art therapy if it's being done and facilitated with a client or clients in a psychotherapy context. Now, to do therapeutic art making, you don't need an art therapist, even though art therapists can do therapeutic art making. But when you're creating something that is a therapeutic art making piece, it's not necessary for an artist to be there. It's about you creating artwork, whether it's visual art, whether it's writing a poem, creating a dance. It's something that you're doing for the benefit of helping you understand something that's on your mind or something that you're struggling with. And so you can have like a social worker, let's say if you're a social worker working at a hospital and you're working with a client, and you realizing that the client responds to art, where you can use art with them in a therapeutic art making context. Or if I've read, studies about that pediatric nurses do with children dealing with trauma, or children who are survivors of domestic abuse. And so, again, that pediatric nurse doesn't need to be an art therapist, but they can guide someone or facilitate someone through a therapeutic art making experience. So I know a lot of people will say, oh, I'm, making this art piece about my such and such, and it's art therapy. It's really art for healing, therapeutic art making, because you cannot call it art therapy unless it's being facilitated by an art therapist who is a clinical mental health professional trained in this and knows the theories and modalities and the ways to work with a client. Because a lot of times people will call themselves art therapists, but they don't know they don't know mental health
Right.
practices, and can get a client in a situation where the client is emoting, and let's say they kind of are re-traumatizing themselves, and that person who has no training in mental health practices now has a person who's vulnerable, that they don't know how to provide a containment space for that person who's been, probably has reignited some trauma through the creation of some kind of art piece. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about what's art therapy, what's therapeutic art making, and what's visual art. And so to kind of circle back, I think with the students I was working with, they probably judge their own comfort level, because I wasn't asking them, tell us your deepest, darkest secrets in this art piece. It was really more about teaching them how to think and how to be critical thinkers and producers. So because when I was an art student, it was more like, here's an assignment, do it. But it wasn't really any guidance about, let's talk about theory. Let's talk about, why are you doing what you're doing? Do you know what you're doing when you're using these objects, these colors, such and such? So when I went off to art school and learned how to critically think as an artist, that's what I taught my students, because I basically was training my undergrad art students to be graduate level art students, which is really just think critically about what you're doing, the material, the idea, the process, the product. Let's critique it, so you're getting feedback on how to develop this into a more thorough idea that's going to really accentuate the ideas that you're bringing forth in your artwork. And I found helpful ways to do it, because at first, I think it was probably turning some students off. It wasn't as helpful because, again, at the time, as I think about what I was going through, like, I'm a perfectionist now. I'm a recovering perfectionist, and so I held students to the standard of, well, if I could do it, you can do it. And I remember having a student one semester who had a sibling who had a serious mental health illness. It was schizophrenia, and it was making it difficult for this student to be able to participate in class. And I had to really think about, instead of like, oh, this is my class, you will do this work, you will turn it in no matter what. I really had to think, whoa, if you are dealing with that, that's going to prevent you from being fully present in your schoolwork. So let me figure out how to work with this student to still get the best out of them based on what they're dealing with. So I had to check myself and realize that, just because I do things a certain way, I'm expecting my students to do the same thing. And that's not realistic. So when I had those growth moments within my own life, that influenced what I did in my classroom. So I'm like, how do I set up my syllabus? How do I set up my courses so that it can be a forgiving experience? Because as students are in college, there's a lot of things that are going on with them. So I came up with ways to say, hey, we've got 6 projects. I'll throw out the lowest grade in one of your projects. I know that life happens. And so you don't have to be worried about the grade or whatever. If you need extra time, I'm cool with that. Just talk to me and let me know what you need. So I think when professors create an environment where students feel comfortable to learn and to bring their best self, or even their whatever self that they could bring to the table that day, they feel more comfortable to then create in a way that speaks to them. And it's the same way that you set it up as a therapist, because you remove the barriers to their treatment, or barriers to them being their full selves in that session. So again, when I was tweaking, how do I teach? I didn't realize until I became a therapist. And as I was looking at things in my life, okay, these processes mirror themselves, because when I'm a teaching therapist, so I didn't lose those 15 years of teaching. I brought it into my therapy work.
I really love it. Oh man, I love everything you're saying. It's awesome to me, because I think about, as you were speaking, I was thinking about how the whole person is impacted, right? Not just the art skill, not just trauma, but as an entire person. And so I was thinking about the journey of going from maybe someone who was insecure, dealing with some sort of trauma, low self-esteem or whatever. And what you said was being a critical thinker and a producer. And so when you are insecure, you have that low self-esteem, whether you're dealing with depression, anxiety, trauma, or like you're just insecure, because just being insecure or feeling like low self-esteem, like that's bad enough. So to go from there to being, I guess, to acknowledging that, yes, I am a critical thinker, I am a producer, I am moving towards my best self. That journey includes being able to grow in that way in a safe space where I can show up to your class or your therapy sessions or wherever you are. And I know that when I'm in front of you, I can let my guard down. And so the way that you described it, even saying life happens, and then you, as the instructor, as the professional with the experience, saying, I need to adjust, I need to grow. And the students see that, and they see and feel the empathy. They feel the connection. It's so much more than your individual skill sets. And so I feel like it's so amazing when someone can show up almost, I want to say, harmed, or maybe they're fragile or weak, and to know this is a safe space where I can grow. And then maybe in their lives, this is the first time that they truly feel themselves growing into their best selves. And so I guess what I'm thinking is, throughout that process, can you maybe tell me about a time or something where you saw that process, where someone showed up in a particular state, I'll say a state where they are clearly not even recognizing their potential.
Hmm.
And then they get to the point where they're just like proud of who they are as a person. And you saw that journey, like, and just kind of like what that felt like from your perspective to see someone go through that journey.
Yeah, I say, I definitely saw it when I was teaching, and even more so, what comes to mind with that question is when I had a job building an art therapy program and retweaking a Vets Open studio here locally in the DMV area. Um, I know I was working with primarily with veterans, and so I was really excited because when I decided to go back to grad school and become an art therapist. One of my first internships was at the VA in Hampton, and it was in the military sexual trauma program in the women's clinic. And so my first day at that internship, I pull up in the driveway and I kind of felt, and I felt like I was home. So I knew whatever I do with this new career, I have to do something with veterans. And so fast forward 10, 15 years later. And so I'm, have an awesome opportunity to build an art therapy program, a private practice, and to also teach art to veterans every Saturday. And so the veterans that would come in, and specifically one veteran I met like in 2019, again, what I learned about working with military folk is that, you all are very structured. As one of my
Yes.
classmates who had worked in this program before, she said when you create, on Veterans Open Studio Day, you need to give them a structured directive. You can't just say, here's some art materials, go forth and conquer. Because, service members, this is what you've been trained to do. What's our SOP? What is it? What are we using? How does it need to be done? When does it need to be completed? And so that helped me a lot to be able to teach the population I was working with. So a number of the veterans would come in and like, well, I'm not really an artist, or when I was in high school, I did such and such, but it's years later, I don't really know what to do. And so it's very similar to when I have an adult come into an art therapy session, because most people stop creating around 16. That's like the last stage of creative development. So adults tend to be very, very hesitant and self-conscious about their drawing. So I have to do a lot of disarming and a lot of to help them get comfortable. So when I was doing Vets Open Studio, obviously it's just fine art instruction, but for some of the veterans that came, it was more about therapeutic art making. So a number of the veterans that I worked with on those days, they're like, well, I'm not an artist. I don't really do art well. I struggle to draw a straight line. And so because I'm also a natural comedian who's probably working on a stand-up comedy career in my head, don't have the bravery to get on the stage yet, I always tell them, if you struggle to draw a straight line or recognizable shapes and forms, this is going to be perfect for you. And so that disarms them. I tell them that when I would do art therapy sessions too. So a number of the veterans would come in a little hesitant. I don't really know what this is about. And so I would create the environment, things I would say to them, the way I would structure what we're going to learn, the art media we're going to learn that day, so that they could just get in and find what worked for them and go forth and conquer. And so they enjoyed that. They're like, this doesn't have to look a certain way. I'm like, no, I'm just going to teach you how to use this material, and you can take it any direction that you want. Here's just, some safety things to be aware of, and here's how it works. And so veteran after veteran, those brave veterans that would come in on Saturdays and be open to this way of learning something. They're like, oh, I learned this new way of doing something. And so those veterans would come back. And I remember one veteran in particular was an Army vet, and they would tell me all the time, Ms. Yon, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not an artist. And like, I know in my head, I'm like, because I teach in this method, I'm like, oh, you're an artist. You just don't know it yet. So
Yeah.
just, trust the process and we'll see. And so again, creating a warm, welcoming, non-threatening, but nurturing space for veterans and service members, so that they can just create. That's what was helpful for them, and they would come back, and so the work that they would create would blow their mind. And so I would tell you, I told you so. Like, you may not have seen it, but again, I hadn't even encouraged them to change their definition of artist. Like, it's not, you don't have to be someone who's trained in the academy to be an artist. There's tons of self-taught artists out there. So these veterans were, and I was very honored to have them trust me enough to help create a space for them to create. And I think with them being with other veterans, because I hear a lot of service members and veterans or retirees, you all struggle to find that brotherhood, sisterhood, camaraderie in the civilian world. So when these veterans would come every Saturday and tell their friends and bring other veterans, they created a community. I was just there with some art materials, some jokes, and something to teach them. And so, and again, one veteran who I again met in 2019, one thing that she gravitated towards was acrylic pour painting. And so I just, touched base with her at um, a vet center activity a couple of months ago. And she has just taken that skill and has just blown up. I mean, she's selling her artwork. She's exploring with different materials. Like, the work that she did with acrylic pour painting 4 years ago is completely different than what she's doing now. Like, her work looks like she's a professional artist. I mean, she's taken that fear and then to realize that I am an artist, I can create, I give myself permission to be a creative person, a creative thinker. And she has just blown me away with how her skill set has grown with this art media that she was definitely afraid of 4 years ago.
Well, that's so powerful. That's so powerful because I think about, like, one thing that you said was how military people want the structure, right? And I was thinking about, for me, because I think about how when you're in the military, everything is measured, everything is quantified. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I can ask you, how healthy are you? And you can describe it any way that you want. But in the military, you have a score between 0 and 100. So, how healthy are you? Oh, I got a 77. Okay, now I know, and I can compare you to everybody else because I have a spreadsheet.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with everything else. So, what is your overall performance? What is your performance rating? Well, I scored this. Okay, so you're in the mid percentile or whatever. We can stratify people. So, out of 27 senior NCOs or company grade officers, out of 27, you're number 13. And so then what happens, they can come in there and work with you, and all of that is taken off. All of that is taken off. So on a scale of 1 to 5, where would you rate my arts? And your response is, what is this 1 to 5 mess? Like, I don't have a grading rubric.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes back to what you were saying about being a critical thinker and a producer, and getting closer to meeting your potential. And I think it's so powerful. And I think that for most people, including myself, haven't really thought about art therapy in a way of getting people to truly, I think about, to truly recognize not just their potential, but where the journey lies to get there. Because, like, this individual you're talking about, when she was thinking of her truest potential, before she met you, the word acrylic was not in there at all.
Mm-hmm.
So what would she be doing now? Well, let's look at her military career.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe she would be doing HR, or she'd be a business analyst, or she'd be doing something that she could excel at, some kind of program management stuff. And she might be bored, and she might hate her life, and she might think she's worthless. But being able to dive into her creative self positioned her to really excel in something she didn't even know that she was able to. I absolutely love it.
Yeah.
Go ahead. What were you gonna say?
No, I was going to say that, and I think with this particular Army veteran and the other veterans and service members that came through, it was also a confidence builder, because I know as some service members, when they leave the military, depending on how they're discharged or even how they, as they reflect on their time in the service, sometimes they go through some really tough things, whether it's combat or military sexual trauma or whatever it is. Sometimes they may not always look back on their military career with fond memories, or with moral injury if they were asked to do something that went against their moral compass. So they struggle with that. And so it was really important to me to create a space where they could just be whoever they wanted to be in that room. And I think with this particular veteran, along with other ones, there was this new type of self-confidence that came through in the art making, and really had them trying things, exploring things, not being afraid to fail, and me telling them that, failure is a learning opportunity. Failure gets a bad rap. It's always seen as a negative or as a you don't want to fail. And so a number of my veterans, came from troubled homes. They would have ACEs, which are adverse childhood experiences, which basically means that there's these certain types of traumatic events that you dealt with in childhood that can set you up for compromised mental and physical health. And so, and these veteran service members were survivors. And because of what they went through, they knew how to get through tough times, but they may have always had this overwhelming sense of inadequacy, which they overcompensate for through perfectionism. And those feelings like I have to know how to do something 100% perfect the first time. So I had to help them unlearn that and also unpack some of that so they could be in this space, whether it was me doing art therapy with them or them just coming to Vet's Open Studio and just learning how to make wire sculpture, to tell them that there is no right or wrong way to do this. Take this skill and use it and take it in whatever direction it works for you. If it makes sense, go for it. If it doesn't, don't worry about it. Come back next week. We're going to learn something else. And so it was self-confidence building. It was reducing a lot of some of their distressing symptomology that they, brought in just from, who they are, what they serve, what they dealt with. And so I imagine that they found a place in a space where none of that mattered, where whatever they did was valid. It was important. It made them feel good. It helped them take on this whole new identity. And I will also say too, as I've worked with veterans throughout all the services, I know I was also doing a monthly open studio for some Marines at the Embassy Security Group at Quantico. And these were Marines who I think, obviously, they were stationed in embassies around the world. They would come to Quantico to rehab, either mental health wise or I guess physical health wise. And so, and I would meet with them. There was this wonderful woman who was a Navy lieutenant. And so she would bring them because they would also find things for them to do within the community. So they weren't just be hanging out in the barracks all the time. So she would bring these Marines up, and most of them were young, between the ages of 19, 21, like the core. And so from interacting with Marines have a really interesting way that they are brought into the service. And so when these Marines would come and create in the open studio, they were completely relaxed. They were completely who they may not be able to be when they're on base or they're in their jobs. And so she would tell me all the time, Jan, I've never seen them so relaxed, comfortable, just really in tune to what you're showing them. And I'm just thinking that, I'm hanging out with some Marines today, hoorah. Let me show them how to do the different things different art processes I was demoing. But she would notice, because she worked with them, just how their demeanor, how their mood would be totally different than it was when they were, in uniform and on base. And so again, that helped me realize that I have to understand how the different branches of service bring people into the service. What else do I need to know about a Marine or a Coast Guard vet or an Army or soldier or an airman that can help me create this room, create this space for them to achieve all those things that I've mentioned that really help them find a new way of being, seeing, and doing. Because I had to be aware, again, as I said, when I taught, I think to be an effective instructor, you need to learn your audience. Who are the people that you're teaching? Because your students change from year to year. And again, at the Open Studio, when I was working, teaching veterans art, those veterans that would come in every week, there'd be different veterans who had different ways of learning, seeing themselves, receiving information. So I had to make those adjustments so that they could be able to be in a space that was going to allow them to really benefit from what they were going to learn, what I was going to teach them, or if I brought in somebody else to teach them an art technique, or the other veterans and service members that they were there with.
That's so interesting to me, because I think about, when I retired from the Air Force, I did 20 years and I retired in 2014. And so, yeah, you have this specific identity of who you are. And you specifically mentioned that. And of course, it's different for, my identity as a 38-year-old, recently retired, Air Force Master Sergeant is so different than a 20-year-old Marine who's been in the Marines for 18 months, maybe, right? Mm-hmm. And so I thought about when I retired, it took me 3 years after my retirement to find a job that kind of aligned with who I was.
Mm-hmm.
I had other jobs and I sucked at all of them.
Not you, Charleston.
Yeah, I was a real estate agent for 8 months. Didn't sell a house. I did software development. I was a Java developer, computer programming. My code never works, and so I was just going through this process, and so just trying to figure out, okay, who am I really? Because especially when you're in the military and you're given those SOPs in that direction, as well as the measurement tools, right, to define if you're doing a good job or not. And so after a certain point in time, you kind of realize, okay, I'm good at this. I can be successful at this. So you don't know what it's like to completely suck at something and have none of the results. Did you have or work with anyone, at any part of your art, journey that just felt like after, I don't know, whether it's one session or 10 sessions or whatever, where they sucked at art, which was a reflection of how they sucked at life. Like they were just kind of on the low. And how do you deal with those people? Because, and I'm asking that because there are some people, I'm sure, that at the end of the first session, they're just like, wow, I can do this. But what about those people that are saying, I can't do this? You're a great teacher, but I can't do this because I suck at everything. How do you deal with those kind of people?
Well, you pretty much want to meet them wherever they are. And so obviously, I do a lot of work with clients about, our thoughts and our thinking. And there's like an art therapy directive I do where we really talk about, how your thoughts are powerful. And if you are what you eat, you are what you think. And
Wow.
how we talk about that a lot. And so when I've had clients like that, or, veteran, civilian, it's really more about, okay, sometimes I think, how is art therapy supposed to help this? Because sometimes you get cases where I don't know how art therapy is supposed to make this happen. So then it's like, okay, then I have to I have to think outside the box. And I know that there's one, I've had clients like that throughout my journey. And I know you really have to try to connect with them in a different way. And I know how I really learned this was I had an internship. It was my child internship in grad school. And it was at a residential facility. And I was working with a lot of kids who were either, they had their foster kids. They're either, I guess the old school term is wards of the state, or children who had been through a whole lot of trauma. And I learned immediately that for them, adults are not safe people. So I really had to figure out how to, understanding that trauma, doing trauma informed work. How do I help these kids feel comfortable with me? Because they didn't have to. Like, I'm just the next intern that showed up at that site. So I had one young man, he was probably 12. And so the first day of our art therapy session, I'm trying to get him to do this art therapy assessment so I could figure out what would be our focus, what would I need to be helping him work on throughout my time there. And so he was resistant. So as a therapist, and even as a teacher, you're going to have resistant people. I don't want to learn. I don't want to do nothing you're trying to show me. I'm not interested. And so I'm like, okay, I'm ready for that. And so I basically just kind of met him where he was that day. Like, he didn't want to draw. So he would just kind of rip a little piece of paper. He would rip a piece of paper on the paper I gave him. And so my clinical supervisor said, just have the student, just have him be in there for 20 minutes. You don't have to do the full hour. And so I really met his resistance with, no matter what you give me, I'm going to be here. And so he would just rip a little piece of paper. And so I would just talk to him, it's kind of just asking like some general, how's your day kind of thing. And so I met his resistance with, I'm still going to be here no matter what you bring to the table. Because basically he was testing me, what I realized later. And so after our 20 minutes was up, I said, okay, cool. We'll just finish this again. I'll come back and get you when I'm back on site on Thursday. And so I walked him across the hall, took him back to his class, and I came back, processed that with my my site supervisor. So that was like that for maybe one or two sessions. But then one day, this client started to turn. And I think, most of my clients at that internship site were young boys. And so I'm like, okay, so I kind of went like, well, what kind of things do, people in this age range like? And so somehow we started talking about football because I like football. I'm a Steelers fan. I have no clue how football is played, but it was my connection to this client. So I think when you realize you have someone who is resistant, depending on the nature of what they're dealing with, if it's trauma, if it's foster care, if it's substance abuse or substance misuse, whatever it is, those resistances are how they deal with the world. So you kind of have to see resistance as, okay, this is probably a safety technique for them. It's a coping mechanism to keep themselves protected. But you, at least for that young man, it was like, I have to keep showing up because probably so many people in this young man's life were not showing up. So I have to be the person who's going to show up and work through those defenses. And so after a session or two, I wouldn't have to go get him. He'd be at the door waiting, coming ready for art therapy. And I think the other thing I bonded through him was sports. And so we would trash talk, during our session. And so I would tease him about being whoever New England team he was a friend, he really dug, and he would trash talk me. And I'm like, hey man, did you see that game this weekend? And so that was something that helped him, I imagine, feel comfortable. So, because art therapy, I think, art making in general, but definitely art therapy and obviously a psychotherapy situation, art therapy is a mediator, because what you'll find is not everybody wants to talk about what's really troubling them. This is why I think, art therapy, the expressive arts therapies are so powerful, because sometimes talk therapy isn't enough. Whether the client may just be hesitant or resistant to talk about what they have gone through, or if they have a stroke and their speech is not where they need it to be. So art therapy is like the silent mediator, because whatever's going on with them is going to come out in that artwork. And I tease my clients all the time, like, your artwork is going to tell on you in this session. So, and there's things that they're floating around in their psyche that they may not even be aware that they haven't thought about or they haven't really come to terms with. And it shows up in the artwork. And so with this young man, showing up for him, being a safe adult, talking to him about things that interest him got him to be able to do the art therapy. And right before I left that internship, on his own, he told me why he was resistant. And and when he shared with me what was going on with him, I was like, oh my goodness. And I told him, thank you so much for sharing that with me. And I even went on to tell him what emotional intelligence, this little 12-year-old boy, this 12-year-old young man who probably had been through hell and was still going through it, decided to tell me why he was resistant weeks before on day one. Nobody coached him to do that. He did that on his own. So this 12-year-old young man, I told him that what you just did is what some folks 4 times your age struggle to do. Telling somebody that I'm struggling with this and that, I don't know where me and my younger sibling are going to be placed, and I just didn't know how to deal with that. So that's why I was resistant that day. And I was amazed that, again, this is what he told me. So kind of going back to even you talking about emotional intelligence and how I feel that works with art therapy, therapeutic art making, this, art for art's sake, it really helps people in the ways that I've learned how to help people become creative producers and thinkers. And so that young man always sits in my head. I even made artwork about him, because art therapists, at least the program I was trained in, we're trained to make art about the internship site, the people you're working with, the tough client cases. And I still do that years later as a, art therapy professional. I make art about tough cases or something I'm dealing with my work site. So when you interact with someone who's resistant and feel like they're not worthy, or they're being treated like they're not worthy, you meet them where they are and try to find some way to help them see that you do have worth and value just by who you are. And if they don't see that, if it's even through the artwork they produce, because the art that they're going to produce specifically in an art therapy session kind of was going to reflect where they are, but it's going to show them that you don't have to be anybody but who you are to do this. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to dot every T and dot every I and cross every T. The fact that you showed up today, you were mindful, you were present, and you tried was huge. And that's when those folks who have very little self-esteem or self-worth start to realize I can do something. Because within art therapy, we do a lot of focus on, the kinds of processes, success-oriented, process-based. Because if you're someone who has low self-esteem or low confidence, We have to provide you with an art directive that challenges that shows you that, within a multi-step process and you hanging in there for step to step, you can do something. You can accomplish something. Success oriented, process oriented. And so those kinds of art therapy directives work well for those clients who are in those kind of that situation that you described. And it really works well because you can show them that even if you don't know how to get everything right in your world, you know how to make a print, you know how to make a painting, you know how to work with watercolor, you know how to work with collage to talk about your feeling, those
See,
kinds of things. Yeah.
when you say that, I think about I'm thinking about the value of that skill set and the perspective of the artist. And what I mean is that we we look at like what's important in the world today, and so much of our culture and society is based on what can you produce, what can you be productive in that results in a profit or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you're telling me is when you talk about someone having the confidence to know I can work with watercolors or I can paint or I can do this, I think about them getting to the point where they realize the value in who they are and what they're doing is not about the way someone else views their productivity.
Mm-hmm.
Like me being good with watercolors is about me being good for me. This is a skill for me, my mental health, my life, my morale. And so I think about the self-awareness aspect of recognizing that I used to live my life based on what others wanted, how they judged me, how they saw me. But I have this skill set that I'm going to work on because I want to and I like it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's so hard for a lot of people because their worth is so much ingrained in validation from other people. And yeah, and so for you to say that about developing those skills and their growth for themselves, I just feel like it's really eye-opening to them in terms of them recognizing their own worth.
Yeah, and it's pretty. And again, as I look back on, when I taught and being a therapist, I really think a lot about, like with art therapy. Like when I used to work at a psych hospital, and I used to do groups on all the units, all the inpatient units, all the outpatient programs. Because usually, if you're an art therapist and you're in a hospital, it's almost like we just need you to do groups every day for the rest of your life. I'm like, can I do some individual sessions? Can I do some intakes? I mean, can I do other things? I love group art therapy. I do miss I'm doing group therapy, but I'm like, after a while, it's just, I want to do something different. But what I loved about group therapy was, you get a chance to see people, especially when you work in an acute inpatient facility, which generally means that they're not going to be there. They're only going to be there for, let's say, 5-10 days. You might see them, depending on how often on a unit, you might see them 2 or 3 times, then you may not see them ever again. So that 1 hour session, that 1 hour group session, there's a lot happening in there. And when you're an art therapist, it's different from just doing traditional talk therapy sessions. As I have to come in, write down their names, introduce myself, tell them what art therapy is, describe the directive, and then do the directive, pass out the materials, give them time to make the artwork, talk about their reflections, gather up all the materials, and leave. I have to do 10 things in 60 minutes when I get on that unit. And I had to figure out how to get this down to a system. But what I did was I would just talk to the clients and just really just start out with a little bit of humor and just talk about, hey, here's what art therapy is. Would tell them that, it's not important that you know how to draw. This is really, because art therapy is not about your skill set. It's not about that at all. It's really more about you just being open to the process of using creativity to explore some concept about what might be going on with you right now at this moment. I tell them it's not about perfection. It's just about you doing the best that you can. And so when you verbally remove the barriers, because they're thinking, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to know how to chisel something out of marble in an hour. I tell them this ain't that kind of production. We don't have that kind of time, And so I would say that when I would walk down the hall, they would see me like, oh no, here comes that art lady. And I'm like, hey, everybody, it's time for art therapy. Meet you at the end of the hall. And so some people will be interested and curious. And then some people who had seen me before, because I was there earlier in the week, they would come in and they would realize, oh, I don't have to know anything about art. I don't have to know how to draw a stick figure. If I do, that's totally appropriate and it's okay. So what I would do in group sessions, whether it's on an inpatient unit or an outpatient, program, is remove all of those predominant things that scare people about art making. And so letting them know that, if all you can do today is draw a straight line or draw some stick figures, that's awesome, because whatever you bring to the table is what we're going to use to help you figure out what help you complete the art directive, the art task, and then should give us a visual picture of what's going on, because the art therapy helps you externalize what's going on. Or if you're someone who likes to write, when you journal, it externalizes what's going on, because when it's in front of you, it's a different kind of reality. Now I know what I'm dealing with. So again, it's all about finding ways, or understanding what the barriers to someone learning how to do art, or learning how to do art therapy is, and then verbalizing, talking about it, creating your, wherever they're going to be doing the artwork, and helping them reimagine a space where I don't have to be perfect. I don't have to know everything. I just need to be present in this moment, and I'm going to do a fine job. And that, how I'm feeling is generally going to be reflected in the artwork, and the artwork is going to speak for me if I don't want to speak myself. I don't even have to talk. I can just create, and that's okay.
Man, I love that so much. I guess for me, what I love is that I understand the importance in the healing journey of having the freedom to be vulnerable and express yourself without judgment. Like
Mm-hmm.
I can just come do the most basic things, and so the judgment piece in a lot of areas in your life is people will judge your finished product or your efforts.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're saying is I'm not judging anything. If you lacked effort today, that's okay. And I love that. I think it's so important. But what I also want to add is I admire your strength through all of this and your resilience. I mean, and so from a high level view, what I hear is working with children in foster care. I don't care what you're doing. I don't believe there's a whole lot of easy days, only because of the emotional toll, right? Based on your connection with the kids. So there's the working with the children who are, wards of the state, and acute mental health inpatient facility, and veterans who have seen all kind of different things. I admire you, because I don't know if you've ever had this thought, but I'm thinking, man, it takes a special kind of person to do that work.
Yeah, I will say, Charleston, when I left academia, or let's say put it on a pause, because I've taught once, taught about 6 years ago, taught a basic design class, and I miss teaching terribly, would love to go back into it in some way. And so when I made the decision to go back to school and go become a art therapist, I'm like, okay, is this the right thing? Am I doing the right thing? Was my old job really all that bad? Could I have reconsidered a few things? I'm like, I've been doubting this career for 12 years. And so whenever I have those doubtful moments, a client or somebody will just magically show up and say, Ms. Yon or Coach White, because my students will call me Coach White. So my clients will call me Coach. I'm like, I really enjoyed what we did today. That really opened my eyes to X, Y, Z. So whenever I have those doubtful moments, something shows up. I'm without fail, Charleston. Every time I've doubted this career, someone unsolicited will say something to me that's like, okay, maybe this was the right decision. So it's not easy. When you work in acute facilities, whether it's psych hospitals, when you're working with kids who in a residential facility, or even if you're working with someone who's in an outpatient program, and so they're basically higher functioning, more emotionally stable, but they're still dealing with some trauma, residual trauma or intergenerational trauma. It's not easy to hear how people have been horrifically abused or traumatized from anything from dealing with racism, sexism, classism, you know, um, to like dealing with a parent who was incarcerated or a substance abuser or losing a parent at a young age um, or whatever it is. It's not easy to listen to that. So it's really big that, so we're obviously, therapists are encouraged to have our own therapists because we have to talk this and for these things out. We're also really big on, how to prevent compassion fatigue, how to, manage vicarious trauma. So if you're listening to someone, if you're working with a client who has a lot of trauma, sometimes by them retelling or telling that story, you are experiencing that trauma as well. So that's what vicarious traumatization is. And compassion fatigue is, working with tough clients who have tough stories, and some of the fatigue that comes from that just by being exposed to that, and how we have to take really good care of ourselves as therapists to be able to be present for ourselves and be present for our clients. So I will say it's not easy. I'm really amazed that I've been able to leave work at work, because I have a tendency to ruminate on stuff because I'm a task-oriented problem solver, and I'm always trying to figure out what is the best way to do something, fewer words, less, more, trying to figure out how to do something better the next time. And so I've been grateful that I've always been able to leave work at work, especially when I'm working with um, civilians, military personnel, whomever it is, working with clients who've experienced really difficult traumas, to leave it at the office. And so this is why it's important that I, make my own artwork, that I'm taking care of myself. Like, am I getting enough sleep? Am I eating well? Am I exercising? Am I meeting with my therapist or talking to my other therapist friends? And I will say I've not always been 100% good at that, because therapists, we're great at helping other people. The caretaker as therapists, or walking wounded healers, what we're also sometimes called, we're great at taking care of other people, but we suck at taking care of ourselves sometimes. And so we have to really figure out, where that comes from, and to really work to be better and stronger at that, because it's not easy hearing that. I cannot tell you many times that working with kids, for example, hear about the ways that they've been traumatized, and I really go in my head somewhere that I don't come back from. Or I think about, how could I find that parent and just say what I want to say to them for abusing this kid? But I'd be in jail if I wanted to tag the people who are abusing the kids that I'm working with. But yeah, so you really have to. It definitely does take certain kind of people to do this kind of work. This isn't for everyone. I never imagined myself being a therapist. And I'm like, how did I get here? But then knowing that, this is where I am here. I've, always reflect on the clients that I've worked with, even the ones that kind of got under my skin, because I believe that you get the clients that you need. So those resistant ones, the ones that don't want to come to art therapy, the ones that sit in your session and kind of fold their arms and be resistant to you. In my experiences, eventually they come around, because they somehow, through what I say, do, or whatever I'm doing, intentionally or unintentionally, they generally come back to me and tell me what was going on with them. And I'm completely blown away when they do that. Because again, as a therapist, whether you're an art therapist, traditional therapist, whatever, there's something about us that brings people to the table, that gravitates towards us. It's the art making, it's our way that we create safe spaces for them to play, and to realize that I can play and be safe. This person is safe by how I've seen them. Because a lot of times people are watching us and we may not realize that. So I think that, again, you're either called to this or you're not. You don't want to be someone's like, oh, I want to do this because I think I'm gonna make this amount of money, whatever. But people who do this work are not in it for the money. Right. It's really more that you see there's a capability, there's certain things about you that help other people get better, get stronger, realize their potential. And so we're in this, those of us who are therapists of any sort, whomever we work with, civilians or military service members, their spouses, their kids, their dependents and caregivers, it's almost like a calling in a lot of ways. At least it has been for me. I mean, it's like an accidental calling, because again, I didn't realize I was going to be here. So I'm like, while I'm here, let me learn some stuff, help some people, and then learn about myself. So I will say one thing I learned about being a therapist was I learned how to stop making assumptions. Because what you have to know as a therapist, at least to be a better human on the planet, no matter what it is you do, from someone who collects garbage, who works in waste management to someone who's a CEO of a company. You have to learn how to not make assumptions, because in the therapy field, if you see a client who comes to you presenting that they're depressed, and let's say they're having suicidal ideation, suicidal thoughts, and you're like, oh, I've seen this 30 times. This is what you do. This is what you say to them. This is the treatment plan you come up with. You're going to miss some significant, important stuff about that person if you take that attitude. So you have to remove assumptions. Like, again, we're all human beings. We have biases. We make assumptions. So as therapists, we have to, as a strong therapist, we'll check those when they show up. But it taught me a lot to not make assumptions. And when I've not made assumptions, I'm actually even more present to hear what's going on with a client. That, yes, I could read their case note and their file or their admission records, but I'd rather talk to them to get that information and to remove assumptions about who this person is, even if I've treated that same issue 40, 50, 60 times.
You said like so much valuable information, and it's so important, even talking about the self-care, being able to leave work at work is so critical. And then you mentioned, you say you accidentally fell into this career, and I don't believe that at all. I feel like there was a slow pull, like you didn't realize it, but it was almost inevitable. It was almost inevitable. Something about your life where you just felt like the slow pull, where like something happens teaching art, something happens with a student, and it's not some epiphany, it's not some mind blowing thought, but just some small part of you was like, I like that. I want more of that. And it was just a journey that brought you here. And I can tell you the reason why I believe that I'm right is because I bet you have a lot of clients who will agree that you were meant for this.
I'm hoping so, because again, like I don't know, I probably spend way too much time going like, why am I here? How did I get here? And sometimes I'm like, Jan, just follow the path, because even as I encourage clients to, trust the process, there's some processes I don't trust. And so I used to tell them, I struggle with this too, but here's what helped me. At least here is what has helped me, or what helped me. But I'm thank you so much for saying that, because you know how you're in your mind, you're in your bubble doing what you're doing day in and day out, because you're trying to, keep a roof over your head, keep your bills paid, keep food in your own mouth. That sometimes we get tunnel vision. We don't really see, maybe I'm here for a reason, or I'm open to understanding what that reason is, or why didn't this career path work out, or why am I not in New York City showing and exhibiting my artwork and getting to the Guggenheim and the Met and all these other places like some of my art school classmates were. But I knew that I didn't want to chase the white cube. That wasn't for me. I just want to get a job so I can pay some bills, pay off these student loans, and keep it moving. But then when I got, started teaching in art school and teaching my first job out of art school, fell in love with teaching. And I realized that I come from a family of teachers. Like I have a lot of cousins who were in the military. Like I come from a large military family. And so a lot of my cousins either taught in the military, or when they retired, they still teach for the military. They teach in some capacity. I also realized, I think my dad's mom did something with social work. So again, work, caregiving in a therapeutic way. So it's in my bloodline when I sit down and think about, well, how did I get here? How did I become interested in these things? And I know from my mother's side of the family, there's a lot of artistry, creativity, that comes from her side of the family. So, and then even for my mom, my name is Yonsenia. You just don't come out of nowhere. And so it's just like a lot of things that I learned from her that really inspired my love of learning and my love of being obsessed with meaning. And when I'm playing around with words or word games, we would play together. So I think as you contextualize what you just said, that I'm so honored to have you repeat that back to me. And I've been thinking about that this week as we were talking about this podcast. There are, messages and things and people that have, traveled before me in my bloodline, and people who I've yet to meet who brought me here to this place, and I need to, on some level, stop questioning everything. That's my obsession with needing to
Yes.
know stuff. But I'm like, okay, I'm here at this moment. What can I offer? What do I need to be open to? So that, again, so I think that, as I said before, you get the clients that you need, you get the students that you need, even the ones that get under your skin. And I'm just wondering, what is my work showing me about what I need to do for my personal self? What kind of growth do I need to make or need to be aware of that I'm receiving every day from working with my clients, interacting with them, again, military or civilian, child or adult, because I've always felt like I can learn from anyone. If they're younger than me, older than me, I'm like, if you have something that I need to know and learn, I'm open to it. I may not like the package that it comes in or the lesson it's going to come in, but I'm trying to be more open to it in the process.
I love it. I love all your shares. I'm so grateful that you're able to join me today. This has been awesome. This has been absolutely awesome. And, and it's funny because to me, there's a list of maybe 20, 25 more things I want to talk about with you. If you got to spare 6 hours later.
Mhm.
But I'm really grateful that you were here. Thank you so much. I learned so much. And I'm sure that everyone that watches this will also, because it's just a lot of things that we don't think about, and when you talk about the therapeutic process, I also think about a lot of the coaches that are out there today, because
Mhm.
you can coach someone through the, like cognitive behavioral coaching and certain things that you can learn. But it's just a different ball game when you're not the NLP coach, when you are the therapist in the foster care program dealing with these children, or when you are in an acute mental health facility. It's a whole different level, and your insight is really, I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot in the last hour or so, and I'm just really grateful you're here. And I just want to ask you, like, before we close out, is there any last words you want to say, last message, last points you want to make before we get out of here?
Yeah, well, I definitely want to thank you, Charleston, for and also Cope Life Productions podcast to even think of me to come on to your podcast and share with your viewers. I thank you for giving me this opportunity to really reflect on what it is that I'm doing, because again, sometimes I'm just rote. I'm just like, get up, go to work, do this, work the second job, whatever, and I sometimes forget about what I'm doing, or really, I never really get a chance to talk about my teaching career, my visual art career, and my therapy career. So thank you for this wonderful opportunity that you've provided me this morning to really look at what I've learned and done in the past 25 years, because you don't often have those opportunities. And I think, parting words of wisdom or food for thought, I definitely encourage anyone out there, if they're struggling with something that feels bigger than themselves, or if it's just time to do a mental health check, do it. Mental health still has a stigma. I think when we have celebrities that come forth and people who are honest about who they are, how they're feeling, how their world is impacting them, it encourages and inspires other people to seek mental health therapy. So I definitely encourage others out there to not be afraid. We are all on a continuum of life and living, and anything can happen to anyone. And I think that if mental health is one of the great ways that we can take care of ourselves. So whether it's traditional talk therapy, I think everybody should do art therapy, because again, it's just not only great, wonderful, and fabulous, but again, it's just you taking good care of you. And so again, I just wish everybody the best of mental health this year, and make some art, whether it's drawing, painting, sculpture, writing, poetry, creating a dance, coming up with a fabulous cooking recipe. Just continue to be creative and continue to think, and using creativity as a key to emotional intelligence. And I feel there's a lot of similarities and parallels between increased emotional intelligence and when you decide to be a lifelong learner and someone who wants to be a lifelong creative person in whatever way that you create and do.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for those words. I appreciate you. We're going to get out of here now. And yeah, I've learned a lot. I got a lot to think about. And again, I just appreciate you so much. You are amazing. I'll talk
You
to you
are
later.
amazing too, Dr. Charleston. It's great to be, just be part of anything that any initiative or any new venue or any new opportunity you're creating for yourselves, and anything that's going to improve the life and living of the people that, you come in contact with. So thank you too for being who you are and the wonderful and amazing things that you're always up to and doing.
All right. Thank you. I'll
Thank
talk to you
you.
later. And to everyone else, thank you for watching. I appreciate you.
Cool. Thank you.